Welcome back to Sir Alex Stories, where we bring you tales of extraordinary moments that transform ordinary lives. Today's story reminds us that genius often hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to shine. Prepare to be moved by this tale of recognition, redemption, and the power of embracing your true potential. She entered the auditorium quietly, an unassuming woman in a worn beige sweater. When the pompous professor challenged her to solve what he considered an impossible equation, knowing smirks spread across the room. Little did they know they were about to witness a moment that would make mathematical history and deliver the most satisfying revelation this university had ever experienced. The lecture hall at Westfield University hummed with excitement as Professor Thomas Blackwood strode confidently to the podium. His reputation was well established. Distinguished mathematician, department chair, and infamous for his contempt toward anyone he considered intellectually beneath him. In academia, assumptions often cloud perception. When we dismiss people based on appearance or title, we risk missing the extraordinary talents hidden behind ordinary facades. Maria Gonzalez slipped into a seat in the last row, smoothing her simple beige sweater over her cream blouse. At 42, she was noticeably older than the graduate students, but she wasn't there to blend in. She was there to learn. Today's forum will explore the Goldbach conjecture and its applications in quantum computing, Blackwood announced, his authoritative voice instantly silencing the room. His neatly trimmed silver beard and expensive charcoal suit projected authority as his gaze swept across the audience, pausing briefly on Maria. His lips twitched with subtle disapproval. She recognized that expression immediately, the quick assessment, the dismissal. It mirrored the look she'd received when applying for the university's custodial staff position 3 years earlier. The forum proceeded with presentations from doctoral candidates. Maria captured detailed notes, her eyes brightening during discussions of mathematical theories. When questions were invited, her hand remained down. Experience had taught her that people like her weren't expected to contribute in spaces like this. During the intermission, Maria overheard two students whispering nearby. "Who's the janitor lady writing everything down?" One snickered. "Probably just sitting in for continuing education credits," the other responded dismissively. Blackwood hates when non-math people attend these sessions. Maria clutched her notebook tighter but maintained her composure. They couldn't know that mathematics had been her lifelong companion, that she'd taught herself differential equations between night shifts while raising her son alone. They couldn't see the formulas that danced in her mind whenever she closed her eyes. How often do we misjudge others based on their occupation or appearance? The person cleaning your office might possess a brilliant mind that circumstances, not capability, have kept hidden. As the forum resumed, Professor Blackwood presented his controversial approach to an unsolved mathematical problem. His explanation was elegant, but contained a subtle flaw that Maria immediately spotted. She'd spent countless evenings exploring this very equation. "Any questions?" Blackwood asked, his tone suggesting he expected none worth his time. The room remained silent until Maria almost unconsciously raised her hand. The moment her arm went up, she regretted it. Every head turned. Professor Blackwood's eyebrows arched in mock surprise. "Yes, ma'am," he said, deliberate condescension coating his words. "I was wondering about the variable substitution in step 4, Maria said, her voice quieter than intended. "Wouldn't that create inconsistencies when applied to the boundary conditions?" The room fell silent. Several students exchanged glances. Professor Blackwood's expression hardened. "Your name?" he demanded. "Maria Gonzalez." "And your department?" Maria hesitated. "I work in facilities management." A wave of whispers cascaded through the audience. "Facilities management," Blackwood repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "How fascinating. And you believe you've identified an error in my work?" Maria's cheeks flushed. "Not an error exactly, just a potential complication that perhaps," Blackwood interrupted, "instead of questioning established mathematical principles, perhaps you should concentrate on more appropriate pursuits." Several students laughed. Maria's face burned hotter as she sank back into her seat, wishing she'd never spoken up. In moments of humiliation, we often discover our true courage. Sometimes the very instance designed to diminish us becomes the catalyst that reveals our greatest strengths. What neither she nor anyone else realized was that this moment of embarrassment was about to become the turning point for an extraordinary revelation. Professor Blackwood wasn't finished. Having found an easy target, he seemed determined to make an example of Maria. Since our guest from facilities management has such confidence in mathematical theory, he said, straightening his tie with deliberate slowness, perhaps she'd like to demonstrate her expertise. He gestured toward the chalkboard. Come forward, Ms. Gonzalez. Maria froze. Every instinct urged her to decline, to escape. But something deeper, pride perhaps, or weariness of being underestimated, pushed her to her feet. The walk to the front of the lecture hall felt interminable. Each step echoed against the hardwood floor as whispers trailed her path. She accepted the chalk from Blackwood's outstretched hand, careful to avoid direct eye contact. Let's make this accessible, Blackwood announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. The word accessible dripped with condescension. He turned to the board and wrote a complex differential equation. Maria recognized it immediately, a problem from advanced multivariate calculus. Challenging, but certainly not impossible for someone with proper training. The difficulty wasn't in the equation itself, but in the public humiliation intended. Take your time, Blackwood said with false generosity. We're all eager to learn from diverse perspectives. More laughter rippled through the audience. Maria felt her hand trembling slightly as she stared at the board. Behind her, someone whispered, "This is painful to watch." Jennifer Park, a visiting professor from Caltech seated in the front row, frowned at Blackwood's display but remained silent, observing Maria with curious interest. Have you ever been in a situation where others underestimated your abilities? How did you respond? Sometimes our greatest growth comes from moments when we're forced to prove ourselves. Maria took a deep breath. The numbers and symbols on the board began organizing themselves in her mind, falling into patterns she'd recognized since childhood. She'd never received formal education beyond community college, but mathematics had been her sanctuary during long nights after her husband abandoned them, after her son fell asleep, during breaks between scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins. She raised the chalk and made her first mark. Perhaps we should simplify, Blackwood began, but stopped when he saw Maria confidently writing. The room grew quiet as she worked methodically through the problem. Her initial nervousness faded as she lost herself in the elegant dance of mathematics. She wasn't in a judgmental lecture hall anymore. She was in her own mind, where numbers had always made perfect sense. After 2 minutes of absolute silence, Maria finished the final step, placed the chalk down, and stepped back. Blackwood stared at the board, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion. He examined her work, searching for mistakes but finding none. The solution was not only correct, but executed with surprising elegance. That's correct, he admitted reluctantly, though anyone with basic calculus training could have managed it. Dr. Park's eyebrows raised slightly as she exchanged glances with a colleague. Blackwood, unwilling to concede defeat so easily, quickly erased the board. Let's try something more challenging, he said, the edge in his voice more pronounced. Something from my current research. He wrote a new equation, one Maria didn't immediately recognize. This wasn't standard curriculum. It was cutting-edge theoretical mathematics, the kind published in specialized journals. This problem has implications for quantum computing encryption, Blackwood explained to the room, though his eyes remained fixed on Maria. If you'd prefer to return to your seat, I would certainly understand. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. The room held its collective breath, waiting for Maria's retreat. Instead, she picked up the chalk again. Maria examined the new equation, her initial confidence wavering. This was different, complex, abstract, with notation she'd never encountered in her self-study. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe she had overstepped. Maybe Blackwood was right about her place. The silence in the room grew heavier as seconds ticked by. Students leaned forward in anticipation, some with pity in their eyes, others with barely disguised amusement. As I suspected, Blackwood said, reaching for the chalk. Perhaps we should continue with the forum. Wait, Maria said quietly, pulling the chalk back. Something had clicked, a pattern within the chaos of symbols. She remembered an article she'd read last month during her lunch break, hunched over a library computer. It had discussed a novel approach to quantum encryption mathematics. She began to write, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The tension in the room shifted as students exchanged confused glances. Even Blackwood's smug expression faltered as he watched Maria work through the problem with unexpected skill. Dr. Park sat forward, her eyes widening as she observed Maria's approach. It wasn't just that Maria was solving the problem. She was taking an unconventional route, one that showed remarkable intuition. Innovation often comes from outsiders who haven't been confined by traditional thinking. Their fresh perspective allows them to see solutions that experts, limited by established methods, might miss. Halfway through the solution, Maria paused, frowning at her work. There was a barrier. The equation seemed to lead to a dead end. Blackwood's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. "A valiant attempt," he said, reaching again for the chalk. Maria didn't relinquish it. Instead, she stared at the board, her mind racing. The room faded away as she focused entirely on the problem before her. Then, like a key turning in a lock, she saw the pathway forward, an elegant transformation that would simplify the entire equation. She began writing again, more confidently now. The scratching of chalk against board was the only sound in the hushed hall. When she applied her transformation, audible gasps came from the front row where the senior faculty sat. Dr. Park whispered something to her colleague, who nodded vigorously. Blackwood's face had lost all color. He was no longer watching Maria's solution with disdain, but with growing alarm. What she was doing shouldn't have been possible, especially not from someone without formal training. "That's not the standard approach," he said sharply. Maria didn't respond. She couldn't. She was too deeply immersed in the mathematics, in a state of flow she'd experienced all her life when working with numbers. She wasn't just solving Blackwood's problem. She was improving upon it, finding efficiencies he hadn't seen. As she neared completion, dynamics had shifted dramatically. The students who had laughed earlier were now silent, their expressions a mixture of confusion and respect. The professors in the front row were whispering urgently among themselves. Blackwood himself seemed caught between contradictory impulses, a desire to maintain his authority and a professional fascination with the mathematical insight unfolding before him. Maria had nearly reached the solution when Blackwood suddenly moved to the board, examining her work closely. His finger traced one particular transformation she had used. "This simplification," he said, his voice tight with contained emotion. "Where did you learn it?" Maria finally looked at him directly. "I didn't learn it. I just saw it." Their eyes met in a moment of silent confrontation. The prestigious professor and the custodian standing before an equation that was bridging their worlds in ways neither had anticipated. Before Blackwood could respond, Dr. Park stood up from her seat. "That's the Zhang Nakamura method," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "Except it was only published in the Journal of Quantum Mathematical Applications last month." She fixed Maria with an intense stare. "How could you possibly know about it?" The question hung in the air as every eye in the room turned to Maria. Maria stared at the chalk in her hand, suddenly aware of the crossroads before her. For years, she had hidden her ability, convinced that no one would believe a single mother working in maintenance could understand advanced mathematics. She'd been comfortable in the shadows, learning quietly, keeping her passion private. But now, exposed in the spotlight, she had to choose. Retreat into the safety of anonymity or stand in her truth. "I didn't know it was called the Zhang Nakamura method," she said, her voice stronger now. "I've never had formal training beyond community college." "Impossible," Blackwood scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "These concepts require years of specialized education." Dr. Park approached the board, examining Maria's work more closely. Yet here it is, perfectly executed. She turned to Maria. "How?" Maria took a deep breath. The weight of everyone's attention pressed against her. In that moment, she thought of her son Miguel, who was working double shifts to save for college. A son who had watched his mother diminish herself for years to avoid judgment. "Mathematics has always made sense to me," Maria said simply. "When I look at equations, I see patterns, connections. Solutions reveal themselves if I look long enough. Our greatest passions often persist despite our circumstances, not because of them. They find ways to flourish even in the most inhospitable environments, waiting for their moment to bloom." A student in the third row spoke up. "But you work in maintenance. Why aren't you?" "Because life happens," Maria interrupted, a hint of steel entering her voice. "I had my son young. His father left. I needed stable work with health insurance." She gestured to the partially completed solution on the board. "This doesn't pay bills or provide health care for a child. The room fell silent as the reality of her circumstances settled over the academic audience. "But why attend this forum?" Blackwood asked, genuinely puzzled now rather than condescending. Maria met his gaze steadily. "Because I love mathematics. Because learning doesn't stop when life gets complicated." The chalk felt heavy in her hand as she turned back to the board. The unfinished equation waited, along with a decision that would change the trajectory of her life. She could stop now, return to her seat, go back to her predictable existence, or she could finish what she started and fully reveal the mind she'd hidden for so long. Maria lifted the chalk and turned to face the problem once more. Her hand no longer trembled. "I'm going to finish this," she said, more to herself than to the room full of academics. And with that simple declaration, Maria Gonzalez stepped into her power, ready to show these elite mathematical minds exactly what a simple woman from facilities management could do. Maria turned back to the board, chalk poised. The room fell completely silent, a hush so profound that the scratch of chalk against blackboard echoed like thunder. Her mind cleared as she re-entered the world of pure mathematics, where social hierarchies and academic credentials meant nothing against the absolute democracy of correct answers. She worked through the remainder of the problem with fluid grace, her hand moving confidently across the board. When faced with a particularly thorny section, she paused, tilted her head slightly, then took an unexpected approach, creating a substitution that simplified the entire equation. Dr. Park gasped audibly. "She's using dimensional reduction to collapse the quantum variance," she whispered to her colleague. "I've never seen anyone approach it that way." Blackwood stood rigid, his expression unreadable, as Maria's solution unfolded. It wasn't just correct, it was innovative, elegant, the kind of mathematical thinking that went beyond mere calculation. True brilliance transcends traditional barriers. It finds pathways that others can't see, making connections that transform our understanding and challenge our assumptions about who can contribute to knowledge. When Maria placed the final value in a neat box and stepped back, no one spoke. The solution glowed on the blackboard like a revelation. It wasn't just that she had solved Blackwood's challenge. She had improved upon it, found efficiencies that hadn't been published in any journal. Dr. Park was the first to break the silence. "That's remarkable," she said, approaching the board. "You've collapsed 3 steps into 1 with this transformation." She turned to the room. "This isn't just correct, it's brilliant." A murmur spread through the audience. Students who had snickered earlier now looked at Maria with undisguised awe. Several professors had pulled out their phones, discreetly photographing her work. Blackwood cleared his throat. "While unconventional, I suppose the approach has merit," he conceded reluctantly. The words seemed painful for him to speak. "Merit?" Dr. Park challenged, turning to him with raised eyebrows. "Thomas, this solution could advance our understanding of quantum encryption mathematics. This is publishable work." Maria stood quietly, chalk dust coating her fingers, feeling strangely detached from the commotion beginning to stir around her. This hadn't been about proving anyone wrong. She'd simply answered the challenge before her as best she could. "Ms. Gonzalez," Dr. Park said, turning to face her directly, "have you documented any of your other mathematical insights?" Maria hesitated. "I have notebooks, just things I work on at night when I can't sleep." "Notebooks?" Blackwood repeated, his professional curiosity finally overtaking his pride. "What kind of mathematics do you explore?" "Different things," Maria replied, suddenly self-conscious again. "Number theory mostly, some work on prime factorization algorithms." Park and Blackwood exchanged startled glances. Prime factorization was at the heart of cryptography research, one of the most sophisticated areas of applied mathematics. "I'd like to see these notebooks," Dr. Park said firmly. A student from the front row stood up. "That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen," he declared, and began to applaud. Others joined in, the sound building until it filled the lecture hall. Maria felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment rather than shame this time. The applause wasn't something she had sought or expected. As the applause continued, she caught the eye of a young woman in the back row, a student who had been watching intently throughout the entire demonstration. The young woman nodded at her with profound respect, as if witnessing something life-changing. "Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated, only to reveal extraordinary abilities? Or perhaps you've been that person yourself. Those moments of revelation don't just change individual lives, They transform our collective understanding of human potential. In that moment, Maria realized her actions hadn't just been about mathematics. She had become visible, truly visible, perhaps for the first time in her adult life. Her knowledge, her mind, her potential had stepped out of the shadows into the light. The applause eventually subsided, but something had fundamentally changed in that lecture hall. Not just for Maria, but for everyone who had witnessed her transformation from invisible to extraordinary. The forum had officially concluded an hour ago, but the lecture hall remained crowded. Maria found herself surrounded by professors and graduate students, all asking questions about her mathematical insights. Dr. Park hadn't left her side, almost protective in her presence. Your intuitive grasp of multi-dimensional analysis is extraordinary, a quantum computing professor told her. Have you ever considered formal study? Maria gave a sad smile. Consider it? Yes. Afford it? No. Across the room, Professor Blackwood was engaged in intense conversation with the department dean. His gestures were animated, occasionally pointing in Maria's direction. His earlier condescension had morphed into something more complex, a reluctant professional respect tinged with defensiveness. Dr. Park touched Maria's arm gently. We should talk about your future, she said quietly. Caltech has fellowship programs designed for exceptional cases like yours. Maria looked at her, startled. Caltech? Me? Talent like yours doesn't come along often, Dr. Park replied. It would be mathematical malpractice to let it go unnurtured. The crowd around Maria parted as Professor Blackwood approached. His silver beard seemed to quiver slightly with suppressed emotion. Gonzalez, he said formally, the department would like to review your notebooks, if you are willing. There might be opportunities to discuss. His words were measured, careful. It wasn't quite an apology, but from a man like Blackwood, it was the closest thing to one. Maria nodded. I'll bring them tomorrow. I'll be reviewing them personally, Dr. Arm. Park interjected with a pointed look at Blackwood that made his mouth tighten. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Maria gathered her belongings. Her phone showed 5 missed calls from the babysitter. Real life was calling, a stark reminder of the practical considerations that had always constrained her mathematical pursuits. Walking toward the exit, she was stopped by a young female student. Ms. Gonzalez, the student said hesitantly, I'm studying engineering and I just wanted to say thank you. For what? Maria asked. For showing that where you start doesn't determine what you know. The student's eyes were bright with emotion. I'm a first-generation college student from an immigrant family. People make assumptions about me, too. Maria felt something warm unfold in her chest. She hadn't considered how her moment might affect others. Outside the building, the evening air felt different somehow, charged with possibility. Maria took a deep breath, thinking about the notebooks waiting at home, filled with years of solitary mathematical exploration. Tomorrow, those private thoughts would be examined by some of the country's top mathematical minds. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. For the first time in years, Maria Gonzalez allowed herself to imagine a different future. One where her mind, not her uniform, defined her. 6 months later, Maria Gonzalez stood in front of a different classroom. This one smaller, with eager undergraduate faces watching her explain a complex theorem. The sleeves of her beige sweater were pushed up as she wrote across the whiteboard. No longer hesitant or apologetic about claiming space, her life had transformed with breathtaking speed. After that forum, Dr. Park had arranged an emergency fellowship, recognizing that talent like Maria's couldn't wait for traditional academic timelines. 2 of her theoretical approaches had already been published, with her name listed as the primary author. Professor Blackwood had come around too, though it had taken time and several departmental meetings where he'd been outvoted. Now he grudgingly acknowledged her insights, especially after her work on quantum encryption had attracted attention from research institutions across the country. The biggest change, though, was internal. Maria no longer hid her intelligence or passion. She spoke with authority about her work, knowing her value didn't derive from credentials, but from the power of her mind. Her son, Miguel, had transferred to the university on a full scholarship, inspired by his mother's example to pursue his own dreams without apology. As Maria finished her explanation, a student raised her hand, a young woman with uncertainty in her eyes, but determination in her question. Maria called on her immediately, remembering what it felt like to be unseen. Never be afraid to raise your hand, she told her students. The question you're afraid to ask might change everything. Not just for you, but for everyone in the room. If Maria's journey from overlooked to extraordinary touched your heart, remember that genius exists in unexpected places, often hidden by circumstances, not lack of ability. Who might you be underestimating in your own life? What hidden talents surround you, waiting to be discovered? We'd love to hear your stories of hidden talents revealed. Where are you watching from today? Share in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of recognition and transformation, please subscribe to Sir Alex Stories for more glimpses of extraordinary moments that change lives forever. Sometimes the greatest minds aren't found in lecture halls, but cleaning them. Like, share, and join our community of storytellers celebrating unsung heroes everywhere.